safety in medicines, focusing on drug safety in pregnancy. And having published a lot, I thought you can actually probably have more impact when you work at the European Medicines Agency and help strengthen the acceptance and strengthening of those methods. The Science and Innovation Support Office is a relatively new office, 3 years old. From just regulating and assessing what comes on our desks, we should help translate innovation and make sure that what can we do better as regulators to help innovation become available for clinical care settings. And a lot of what has been said before resonates, but I'm sure it'll come up in the discussion.
Mairead.
Hello, is this okay? Can you hear me? So my name's Mairead O'Driscoll. I'm from the Health Research Board in Ireland. I've actually got two hats here today. The first is I'm also the chair of the International Consortium for Personalised Medicine, which is a consortium of public funders, and we're trying to develop a more coordinated and strategic approach to funding personalised medicine research across Europe. And in my role in the Health Research Board in Ireland, I'm the Director of Research Strategy and Funding, and we're an agency funded by our Ministry of Health, and our goal is to improve health and to improve the delivery of health services. So we have a particular interest in the title here, which is the cross-sectoral collaboration, and how to get the research into practice so that we change practice and influence policy.
Okay, now you've met Tom before. And Tsveta, tell us about your organisation, and tell us also, because this is a patient organisation, I'm very delighted to welcome you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Tsveta Schyns. I'm a molecular biologist, and yes, my organisation is the European Network for Research on Alternative Hemiplegia and also the ATP183 disease consortium. Why I'm here, because I think public-private partnership is very close to my heart. My daughter, one of our child, my daughter is affected of a rare disease, which is alternative hemiplegia, and this is simply the reason I work in this field in rare diseases. And since the beginning of finding out the clinical diagnosis, it was very clear to me and my colleagues that's the only way to move forward without much knowledge of this disease and not knowing the patient, is to really work with various partners, everybody who is there in the field, and in a partnership. Another interest that I have is, of course, on the topics of the session today, is also I work as an expert for European Commission, evaluator for research projects, and so I've gained some insights into the IMI program, so I'll be interested to follow up on that.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Andreas.
Hello. So my name is Andreas Lymberis. I'm a biomedical engineer, working in the European Commission at Directorate General CNECT. So we are in charge of the digital agenda and the digitization in Europe program. My involvement for about more than 20 years now is on, let's say, systems and technologies that can be built around the body, inside the body, next to the body. This is where let's say, the area of wearables come from. I introduced in 2003 smart clothing in e-health, and build a group on bioelectronics and micro-nanobio systems, because this is, again, a very important converging technologies that really can create opportunities not only in health, but also in food safety, in environmental monitoring and other bio-applications. So why I'm here? Well, also we have in the electronics, let's say, sector in Europe, a very important joint undertaking that is driving the strategy in Europe on electronics, which is called EXCEL, European Components and Systems, which is also GU very much, let's say, try to work together with IMI, so how to put electronics and smart systems on the service of new therapies and new drugs. So I think it's very important continuity of already started collaboration and discussion on these areas of collaboration. And I think that I appreciate so far the discussions and the open mind of participants and panels. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, so let's start with you. What do you expect from an integrated care and in converging technologies? What would you expect to see and like to happen?
Yes, well,
just briefly.
It's not an easy question, because integrated care for someone who is at the end of the road and want to serve, want to use the services, would see differently the integrated care as I see it from the technology development point of view. So the programs are, I mean, unfortunately, a little bit segmented, and I think the sectors are segmented, and the communities are segmented and working on their own agenda and their own focus. But integrated care would be, for example, if some of these projects that I'm in charge of would be able to validate some prototype technologies, not only in the lab, which is TRL4 for those who know what is TRL, technology readiness level. So if we have a technology system fully operational at the laboratory, it is very far from being at the interest of the end user or even of the industry if it has not been tested, validated in real environment, preclinical testing, clinical testing. And so for me, it is important to bring these technologies much closer to the real life. So validating and make it really evidence-based for the end user, for the industry. And so integrated care for me is to put these technologies and these devices really closer to the end user.
Okay, Tsveta, how about you? What would you expect to see if technologies converge? What would you like to see?
Yeah, coming from rare disease perspective, I can say we cannot expect much as a rare disease. I've learned not to expect much, so I just want to give you the real experience on that. When, as I said, we have had a clinical diagnosis, we used the available technology, which was the internet, actually, to get to connect to other parents and people who knew about this disease. So we set up this public-private partnership, totally voluntary, and our next usage of technology was to set up an online registry secured and funded partly by the European Commission, which was increment, really very important step for us to move forward. We have worked for 6 years under this partnership to identify the gene or possible genetic causes of this disease. And then it came the next generation sequencing technology, which in just a couple of months gave us the gene. And so we have a monogenic disease, and we have found out that actually there are more diseases concerned by the same gene, and we have this has changed so much the field as well and understanding of these diseases. So I can only say that we have much more to expect how technologies to the field of rare diseases. So the final thing I want to say, what I expect to tell you, we had proof of preclinical indication, let's say, but concept of potential therapeutic development in this disease based on the very excellent research performed by European sciences on this in 2012. And we have started, we have thought about the concept of gene therapy for this disease. And we have tried 2014 connecting to small, medium-sized industry, and we have really tried to put this partnership to focus on this and to develop. And we haven't been successful because we have lacked experience, we have lacked funds, available funds. And I can tell you now, 2018, our friends and colleagues in the United States are ready to, and they're already developing, and it will be very, I'm sure, will be very fast. So what I would expect is that we don't have to learn and to invent, to learn by ourselves and to invent things that have been already done in this field. And I'm very glad I listened very carefully to the introduction video, which was excellent this morning, and I noticed the advanced therapies on the agenda and rare diseases on the agenda of IMI too. So I can only say I expect that this will happen. So I stop here. Thank you.
Okay. Tom, how about you? How do you see it at Roche?
And I think one of the things that we see as a challenge and something that is particularly important in Europe to do is to first of all, I think is to for Europe to ensure that it stays in the long term a place which is interesting for healthcare companies, for innovative companies to invest in. And I think there's a number of structural issues which Europe has, which are a challenge to do this. The one is the fact that in terms of having institutions which are committed to addressing some of the issues in public health in the long term, we've got some fantastic institutions like the EMA, but there's the fact that healthcare delivery is essentially a national prerogative. This makes having a joined-up long-term strategy to deal with some of the long-term structural issues in healthcare a challenge, and it means that in other geographies are sometimes more advanced in terms of their ability to integrate and uptake innovation and to enable innovation. So, I think this is one of the things which we see as foundational, is having a long-term stable framework conditions with legal certainty, with fiscal stability, and also having institutions. And I think Elena addressed this in some of the points she made in terms of healthcare data, having open, scalable, interoperable approaches to sharing healthcare data and making the best use of healthcare data are essential for us to get a learning healthcare system. And I think one of the other things that we'd like to see is essentially more joint risk-taking in terms of addressing some of the major public health issues that we face. As a company, Roche is, for instance, investing hundreds of millions in the development of medicines for Alzheimer's disease. The industry as a whole, or the pharma industry as a whole, has spent hundreds of millions trying to develop medicines which will essentially be disease-modifying in Alzheimer's disease. And we see major opportunities or challenges coming if we are able to develop a medicine which is disease-modifying. We see challenges in terms of technologies to identify the right patients, challenges in terms of making sure there's enough capacity within the healthcare system to take up these innovations, etc., etc. So, and these are cross-sectoral challenges which go way beyond what a pharma company is able to do by itself. But we see these things as both opportunities and challenges which we'd like to see jointly addressed through cross-sectorial collaboration.
So technology uptake is, by the people who are actually going to use it in real life is critical, because unless you have their involvement right from the start, it's only when you get to the end that they say, oh, we didn't want one of those. It doesn't work for us.
I agree that it's, with the Alzheimer's example, you probably need to have a medicine in your hands which people believe is disease modifying before you can go too far down the route of involving. So
we're in HIV territory, aren't we? In other words, you only told people about their results once there was a treatment available.
Absolutely. That's with the individual patient, but also in terms of healthcare systems. Yes. But I think it's very important for us to think through. This is, as an individual company, first of all, what the likelihood we think of making a particular innovation is, but also what the consequences of that in terms of healthcare delivery are, and how we expect our stakeholders to deal with it once once we're able to bring those innovations forward.
Okay, Mairead.
Okay, so I think in terms of expectations, I think what we would like to see is more of a I suppose, a feedback loop, a virtuous loop between research, practice and evaluation. And I think we would like to see a much better evidence base actually for interventions, and probably better use of the evidence that we have, because we actually have a lot of evidence and we're not always using the information that we have. And I suppose the question is, why is that? And, you know, what are the barriers? So a better understanding of the barriers to uptake and to implementation, I think, would be very useful.
And is that partly because there's money for innovation, but not money for implementation?
I think it's partly that, and I think it's also partly a kind of a mindset where we sort of tend to think in terms, we think, you know, here's the problem, we're going to solve it, and you know, here's our solution. So we go to people with the solution instead of making them part of the whole process to begin with. So I think actually there's never a reason that I can think of, or particularly, or mostly I can't think of a reason why you would not engage the end users at all stages along the process. And I don't think that in terms of patients and practitioners, people working in our health systems, they're not passive recipients of the technology. I think they're very active, and actually they're experts in their own right, and I think we probably ignore that expertise at our peril, because of course they're the experts in what can and may or may not work on the ground and what's actually needed. So I think with a greater engagement from our users right at the very beginning and all the way through, and actually as part of the research process, we'd probably hasten and speed up implementation.
Yes, I always think when you say things like that of how many of you have elderly aunts or uncles who have hearing aids, who keep them in the drawer by the bed, and they say to you, they don't work, and you say, that's because they're in the drawer by your bed, you're not wearing them. And actually the reason that they're not wearing them is because they're uncomfortable, or, you know, the design isn't helpful.
I can speak from experience with my elderly mother, they're just too fiddly for her to put in, you know, so, and this, anyway, this is, we might be going off tangent slightly, but you know, it is relevant, I think, that we do actually, you know, if we're serious about cross-sectoral collaboration, we really have to think about how to do it, because it's actually hard work. It's very hard work. So you actually have to think about what sort of models you put in place to actually facilitate that and encourage that to take place, to happen.
Yeah, so strong message coming out here for IMI. Let's hear from you.
Thank you. So echoing what Mairead is saying and what others have said, so the silos need to be broken down. How do you do that? You do that by involving stakeholders much earlier on. And that includes regulators, I'm afraid. So it has been mentioned before that as regulators, we offer the opportunity to do joint advice with HTA bodies, and that with notified bodies, it's more of a challenge. That's not because of us. We are open to engaging in some way, and we're trying to develop ways that are acceptable within the legislation and actually work for people. So,
and have you got the staff on EMA who understand, you know, the other technologies? I mean, digital or AI or whatever. I mean, because you need expertise, don't you? And you need the best expertise.
Absolutely. And so that brings me to the next point I was going to make. So thank you. And that is that, of course, in Europe there is a lot of expertise, and as EMA, we're actually officially the secretariat of the European regulatory authorization. So we're very much trying to harness the expertise that's available within Europe and bring that expertise to our committees and our assessments. It's not just EMA staff. It's actually, there's a lot out there. And so I'm grateful that you made the health contact stand up. We have the Strategic Governance Board as well, with contacts in member states for academia. And I think one of the things that needs to be done is use a lot more of the expertise in Europe, bring that together. And IMI can, of course, have an amazing role in this. And I forgot to say I'm a member of the scientific committee.
That's
representing EMA. So I think there are loads of opportunities. We're not using the expertise that is available in Europe enough. Also, when we think about medicines innovation, sometimes there are hurdles in place because of existing infrastructure that might not actually be there at all in some of the newer member states. Are we using that enough? Some of the developments that are happening in newer member states doesn't make it to EMA, where I think, well, actually we could be using a lot more, might not even be that expensive. So I think IMI Europe brings challenges and hurdles because of all these different opinions in different member states. Having the patience to bring all that together actually develops an opportunity for synergy and then acceleration of bringing it to patients.
So what kind of incentives would you offer or make available to create that system that you'd like to see?
So is it Ova from the EBI made a very good point, money makes the world go round. I think that is, of course, important, but I think ultimately, maybe I'm an idealist, I'd like to think that we want to do the best thing for patients. If we can think about whatever we're developing and when we're trying to break down silos, keep the patient, the end goal in mind, and really develop and choose the priorities such that we're making the biggest impact on European public health, to me that's a massive incentive that will stimulate people in academia, and it will stimulate patient organizations. If people feel that, yes, we're involved, and yes, we're actually making the world a better place, that's, of course, nobody, you know, you have to have commercial incentives if you want companies to develop innovative medicines, but ultimately, you know, innovative medicines that are not affordable don't make it to patients. And so we have to prioritize in such a way that we do make the world a better place.
And indeed, actually, getting patients to meet researchers is often an important part of it, because I quite often find that researchers actually don't know that much about the condition that and they've never met a patient with a condition that they're researching. And actually, when they do meet them, it's a huge incentive for them to help deliver.
It's true for regulators as well. Regulators really value the input that patients and the patient perspective bring. So Tom mentioned earlier in Duchenne that, you know, we've been using this very old-fashioned endpoint for decades. It took 2 years for the qualification opinion to come through. That was the first, you know, the more of these wearables and devices come for qualification opinion, the less persuasion we have to put to the member states to make these things acceptable. So I ask you, yes, we try to be quicker, but please also bear with us and keep engaging with us. And yes, do bring the patients, because, you know, that then teaches us as well what matters to patients, what is important in these innovative developments.
So patients, a really important voice there. Mairead, what incentives would you like to see?
Well, I think, you know, I'm coming at it now from the perspective of a funding agency, and a lot of it does come down to how we actually design our calls and our topics, and how we select the topics in the first place, and then how we assess the proposals that come in. So what we've been looking at is ways of making the knowledge, the knowledge user part of a research project actually part of the assessment criteria. So in other words, you ask people to explain right at the beginning how they're involving the knowledge user, maybe to include people on as part of the research team, to talk about that right at the beginning and to have a plan for that, and then to make that part of the assessment criteria and the monitoring criteria all the way through. So in other words, it's not just an add-on at the end. And I think, you know, people do respond to incentives. I mean, our experience generally with researchers is that they do respond, you know, whatever you put, you know, if something's going to be measured or marked or assessed, they will tend to respond to it. So I think the other thing we've been working on is actually including end users and patients and members of the public in the actual assessment of research projects. Now, I mean, clearly, a lot of projects are, well, most projects, pretty well all of them are highly technical, so we're not talking about assessing the technical aspects and the scientific quality and so on, but they're certainly very often in a very good position to assess the usability of something and the knowledge transfer aspects of a proposal. So, I mean, they're the sort of things that you know, we're finding quite useful in terms of changing the way people think about things and just changing the culture of how research is taking place.
Okay, because we talk about interdisciplinarity a great deal, but maybe one of the things that we need to do more of is actually, in this particular field, bring in researchers from other fields to talk right at the beginning when something is being developed.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. I mean, if you can see it all this morning in all the presentations and everybody's comments. I mean, there are huge sort of social, ethical, almost philosophical questions that a lot of this technology is going to throw up. And I think this is where our colleagues in the arts and humanities are going to have a very, and social sciences really have a very big part to play. And, you know, bringing people from those disciplines in and working, you know, in those genuinely, you know, interdisciplinary teams, I think would be really productive.
And actually, Tom, you mentioned that that behavioural sciences should play an important role in the future, because of course, you know, you can make as many devices as you like, or you can, you know, develop genomic panels that will tell people whether they're at risk of, oh, I don't know, an eating all the pies gene. But, you know, it doesn't stop them eating pies, does it, necessarily? It's the behavioural science bit that's just as important.
I mean, I think this is an area which, you know, for us as a company, but I think also an industry, we have to be more and more aware of, and essentially the potential value of digital therapeutics, if you want to call them that. Technologies which help people essentially have good behaviours or can coach them to good behaviour. And we see there's, you know, that they obviously have standalone utility in some diseases, but also matching these up with medicinal therapeutics. We see there's a lot of potential there as well. You know, encouraging people to, first of all, you know, take their medicine or to adhere to a therapeutic regimen, but then also to get a feedback loop for the patient to see how they're doing. And I think there's you know, a tremendous amount of potential there to improve healthcare by having essentially a coach which is in your pocket or in a device, which enables part of the healthcare burden to be taken away from the physician and integrated into a simple tool to. So
something on your shoulder that says, "Put down that pie, madam." And we shouldn't talk about good behaviour. I don't know how many of you felt like this, but, you know, good behaviour was something at school, and some of us quite enjoyed bad behaviour. That's an issue in itself. But how would you, to be serious, how would you want to see those kind of approaches incentivized and bought into, along with the other technologies, into the future IMI approach?
I mean, in terms of IMI approaches, that and I think there's room, and we've, you know, within the FPER community and the people who are looking at this from an industry side, I think we've opened ourselves, or we are continuing to open up to bringing in other sectors into setting the research agenda and into creating visions. But I think we also need to think about big visions. I mean, we've had a program around called Think Big to try and drive better ideas. But having, I mean, if you think about the 100,000 Genomes project in the UK, this required a lot of vision and a lot of risk-taking, and we need major visionary efforts like that, I think, to make big step changes. So I think that's on the one side. I think on the other side, healthcare systems really need to think about some of the structural barriers to uptake of innovation, and, you know, whether this be the fact that budgets need to be shifted from one part to another, or there's need to train certain sets of skills to allow the uptakes of technology. I think this is also an important part as well to make sure that innovations are appropriately adopted by healthcare systems, which can have a major public health impact.
Tsveta, how would you like to incentivize collaboration?
I was, again, speak from my personal experience with this public-private partnership. So it is, I think, to me, very simple. The greatest incentive is to have a shared common goal. That is what I think is most important, to bring people together. And this goal should be, of course, relevant, should be justified, should be credible. The second thing, of course, is what we were talking this morning, and there were some wonderful examples from the presentations here. It's about the tools which are necessary to incentivize, well, necessary for this to move forward. And technologies, but also funds. So access to these funds, it's a major incentive for people collaborating and working across sectors. And when we talk about here sectors, again, my mind is in research and rare diseases, but I think we want to talk about integrative care. So we absolutely have to think about education. We have to think about, health technology assessment. I mean, the regulators, of course, and I think all this has to be facilitated by the tools that are necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andreas, incentives for you, and make it brief because I'm just about to go into the audience to ask them be thinking about is I want you to be thinking about what's the role of IMI in this. So just tell me your incentives and then you be thinking about what should IMI be doing.
My incentives from the European program point of view, you mean? Well, yes, I mean, incentives is that the Commission is putting money on the table to bring actors together and working together. We're very good in facilitating collaboration, this is one, but if we don't have the right strategy, we're going to confuse people. So the strategy from my point of view is to mature technologies, to bring the solutions to the real field, to test them in a real environment with real samples, real patients, and show evidence that these solutions will bring an added value to the people and to the industry as well, because our program is really to help industry to develop further and to be competitive worldwide. So industry and end users are the focus. The incentive for my projects is really to address real needs from the end user point of view and go as far as possible on the development of their technology to bring evidence. I mean, we have to realize that it's not so easy from the moment that there is a new idea on the table to develop a new sensor, a new technology. You need at least 7 to 10 years to make an integrated prototype system that would be able to measure real samples and to bring some relevant results. So if you keep in mind this life cycle of 10 years from idea to the manufacturing of the product, if you want, you have to be patient and we have to go progressively, but also we need to develop new technologies in a disruptive way, new sensors, non-invasive, shift paradigms, bring doctor inside the body, make a system smelling if we're sick or not. So this kind of new paradigms for diagnosis, for prevention are very important. But the mainstream is really to validate these technologies and to show that they can really help people at the end.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to come to you now because I want some thoughts from you. So this isn't questions now, it's just what you think IMI should be doing. And if you'd rather put this in Slido, do put it like that if you'd prefer. By the way, if you've put questions in on Slido and we haven't got to them, don't think that they've been wasted because they're all going to be thought about by IMI. So bung them all in, throw lots in. So anybody got any thoughts on what they think IMI should be doing? Hello.
Andreas.
You've got a very nice smile. So tell us who you are.
I am director from DG Santa. We speak today often, but I'm here also to hear about my comment as a member of the board of IMI. You know, it's also to us as a board. I think we should build, at least this is for my thinking, is what Miriam said about the role of you call this technology transfer office. I am familiar with this concept from the university to the business, but I think you established the kind of new concept from technology to the end clients, user, doctors, patients, and so on. So I think this is something we have to reflect, you know, who is in the system, which we can stimulate this development, what kind of knowledge, what kind of data, what kind of support person or institution should have. But the second, you know, big issue is Thomas mentioned about where we are going with the regulatory field. We are jumping to the new territories like data or behavioral science. But what kind of knowledge we should have? You mentioned digital therapeutics. I am fascinated about this because a few months ago we didn't speak about this. Now you can find on the Wikipedia. Then this is already there. But FDA is already doing the course on digital therapeutics. So how much we should develop in Europe our regulatory science, and which place, universities, notified bodies, I don't know, tell us, and who is going to develop, sensors, how we validate them, what is the science or to help, regulatory science to help this technology be deployed to the patients with the safety and efficacy in effectiveness, basically.
Okay, so you've got their horizon scanning and a kind of IMI tech transfer office. Anybody else, any thoughts about what IMI should be doing in this space? Sir, at the back here. And just briefly, if you would.
I have a question. Can you imagine a strategy, not now, but say in mid or far future, where there will be no pharmaceutical companies will actually not be charging for medicaments, but for keeping people healthy? This is quite like negation of current paradigm. Health,
okay,
health ministry is now managing health, not sicknesses, not health.
Okay, that's an extremely good thought. So actually at the moment we're very concentrated on illness. How should IMI in the future turn itself around to think about wellness and to think about the preventive agenda? And Corinne, I'm going to look at you for this one, because that's a very interesting, it's an important point that you've raised. We all talk of good talk on prevention, and actually what do we do about it? Not very much.
So the word prevention is music to my ears. Of course, I think the question was also a little bit about payment issues, and I will not go into that because that's not our remit. IMI is doing a little bit on prevention, and Thomas mentioned preventing Alzheimer's disease from coming to the fore. I agree that there's a lot that can be done by IMI, and especially if you go into the cross-sectoral space, then wearables and digital technology, of course, offers many opportunities. And so to me, if we can use the public-private partnership initiative to bring down costs of healthcare, of medicine use, that's extremely attractive. Whether it's attractive to pharmaceutical developers, maybe if there's an incentive at somewhere else in the compensation space.
Okay, so I'm looking at Tom now. What are incentives are? Because at the moment, particularly the way that hospitals are reimbursed, it's better to, excuse this way of putting this, but it's better to go out and kick an old lady in the street and get her in for a hip replacement, because you get paid for a hip replacement, but you don't get paid for preventing somebody having a fall. I'm not suggesting you go around kicking old ladies.
I think that we are, that the industry are obviously rational actors in this space, and we respond rationally to the incentives which are laid out there. In terms of being, as a company and as an industry, invested in healthcare and not in curing. We're obviously the part of healthcare we're most focused on is frank disease and frank unmet need. But if we can find ways, and I think it's an extremely challenging thing to do, to essentially do disease prevention, and for many diseases, or for many common complex diseases, because you have to have measures of disease or measures of disease progression which everybody subscribes to and everybody agrees it's important to modulate. I think as an industry we do invest in these where those measures are there and where there's a clear connection between, for instance, the biomarker and development of disease. So it's not. I'm not sure the extent to which incentives have to be changed to this, but it's really what I think needs to be done is that science needs to progress, and the relevant risk factors in those, or for the development of those diseases, need to be identified. And that's, I think that's a challenging thing to do, because you need to have the interventions. For instance, in Alzheimer's disease, you need to start with something that modifies the disease. Then you understand more about the biology. Then you can develop new tools, for instance, for diagnosis. And you slowly move the field forwards by having interventions which modulate the biology. Then you learn more about the biology. That goes back to science, etc., etc. But you need to have a starting point.
Now, I see that Sam Walker of Asthma UK, where's Sam? Hello, has got a very interesting question, a good idea for an incentive. Sam, tell us about your idea for an incentive.
I think it goes back to what you were saying about following the money. I think if you mandate and require people to give evidence of that they've involved patients, which was my question about how you involve patients, then the researchers will do it. We've worked very hard to try and make sure that people with asthma get involved, and it changes the dynamic of discussions, it changes the dynamic among researchers. But IMI could make that a very strong component of any funding in the future, is to say, and not just a ticking box exercise, but to say, we want to tell us how you've involved people. And to me, that really strengthens projects.
Yeah, okay, so that's a good thought. Anybody else over here? So tell me all, who are you?
Hi, my name is Sarah Mertnum. I'm from the Austrian Social Insurance, and I kind of want to come back to this point and something that's been mentioned before, with also the Alzheimer's example. I think what you were alluding to also was, are we going to be able to pay for it? I mean, you phrased it nicely in uptake. So I think for digital technologies, I agree that there's cross-sectoral issues of how we can actually provide uptake. But for simple medication or advanced medication, but that is delivered through payment schemes, my question is, should we not only involve regulators early, and I think early dialogue is a good option, and I think it should be taken up much more, but also payers. I think we also have an interest to provide a maximum of health outcomes, and I wish that we were also thought of as a partner to actually early on ensure that access then can happen.
But would that mean that payers would only go for the things that they thought would be the cheapest, rather than perhaps go for things?
I don't think so. I think what we have to realize that we have a certain health budget, and we also as a payer have an interest of keeping our populations healthy and spend it in a wise way. And I think if there's a drug that can provide an actual real benefit, then we're definitely willing to pay for it, but we might have to shift the budget from other drugs. So we need to really look at what can we afford, and also for us, it probably makes sense to know well in advance what is coming at the market, and kind of make these decisions in advance, and also to justify them better. So I think not only patients and regulators need to be involved in IMI projects early on, but also the people who actually make access happen in the end.
Okay, so any on our panel, anything to add to that before we close?
No, just to say, I think that the issue around prevention is actually very interesting, because in a way it points to a bit of a culture clash here. I mean, prevention research tends to be underfunded, but then you get into this, the clash between doing research and health research for economic impact, and doing health research for social and health, population health impact. And while sometimes those two things are one and the same, they're not always the same. And I suppose as a result of that, I think that the prevention research has often maybe suffered a little bit because it isn't seen as having an immediate economic impact, even though you can argue, depending on how you want to assess economic impact, that it actually does further down the road, if you're looking at just keeping your population healthier for longer and so on. But I do think it comes back to one of the reasons why cross-sectoral collaboration can be quite difficult and can be quite tricky, and it's because you have to understand that people actually do have different agendas. They aren't always aiming for the same thing, which is a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you please thank our panel?